think it is actually 2 o'clock or possibly even just after. I think we are going to start this webinar this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. People are joining all the time, but we'll just admit them and start anyway. So welcome everyone to Work Avenue and to our weekly webinar. We are covering today a topic that has been headed from pizza delivery driver to PwC. Before we get going on that, I'd like to make a few introductions just so everyone knows who we are, what we do, and how the session is going to go today. For those of you who don't know Work Avenue, welcome to my organisation first of all. My name is Emma May. I'm Director of Operations and Employment at Work Avenue. And Work Avenue is an organisation that helps people earn a living. We help people earn a living typically by either helping them find a job or by helping them become entrepreneurial and start a business. One or the other are the two generally most usual ways that people do earn a living, and we help people with both of those. My own personal background is that I've worked in HR in the private, public and not-for-profit sectors, and for the last 7 or 8 years have been working in the field of employment advice, most recently of course for Work Avenue, this particular organisation. We help people right across all stages of their working life, from leaving school to graduating to job changes in the middle of their working life for whatever reason, whether they're just choosing to grow and develop their career, or whether life has thrown at them a bit of a curveball and they find themselves seeking work, perhaps when they wouldn't have wished to have been seeking work. And we work also with people right through to beyond retirement age, who still wish to or need to continue working for any reason. So this afternoon, our session is going to be mainly run by Adam Katz. Adam Katz is going to be delivering this session this afternoon. So let me just introduce him first of all to you. Adam is a consultant. He's a consultant who has held roles previously in PwC, EY, and his current role is that of operating model manager at Whitbread PLC. As a consultant, much of his work has involved working in the field of recruitment, and he's really seen that from all angles. He's seen it as the recruiting manager, the hiring manager, the process manager, obviously also the applicant's angle as well. And what makes it really, really interesting, of course, is the fact that he's lived through and has applied all the lessons that he's going to sort of talk to us about this afternoon in his own working life. So he's seen it both professionally and personally, and hopefully he's going to impart all of that this afternoon. I guess his message was a very, very compelling one to us this afternoon. I was a pizza delivery driver when I got hired by PwC from networking on LinkedIn. And I think that's the reason. It really was a terribly compelling message. And that's the reason that it's been such an immensely huge sign up to this particular session. It has actually been a sellout this afternoon. So hoping there'll be room for everyone on the session. And I hope everyone enjoys it. Adam's sharing his screen right now. I'm going to hand over to Adam to actually sort of carry on with his introduction and get going on our session this afternoon. Just a few little bits of housekeeping, first of all. All the usual Zoom requests, please. If everyone can stay on mute, it just helps everything become a little bit more seamless and make sure there's no interference from everything. If you have any questions are really, really welcome this afternoon. But if you have a question, it would be really helpful if you could put them on the chat function. I will be looking after that, monitoring that, and Adam will break occasionally to take the questions. So hopefully we'll be able to cover all the questions and cover them in a timely manner. And I hope we'll be able to address all the questions that you have. So please don't hold back with your questions. If you have a question, the chances are someone else also is thinking the same thing. So don't be shy to ask the question. It will not be a pointless or a silly question. It will be a worthy question that invariably other people will want to know the answer to as well. And finally, just to let you all know that we are recording this session because this was a sellout. We will be putting it on Work Avenue's YouTube channel for everyone to view afterwards, and B, also it'll be available on our website as well. So people will be able to visit it either for the first time if they haven't seen it already, but also to consolidate and reflect upon what they've heard today and think about taking forward in their own way as well. Adam, I'm going to hand over to you now, if that's okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Emma. Just to reiterate, please, if you do have any questions, there really are no silly questions. An answer is only obvious once you know it. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. So please do ask questions. I also just want to thank again Work Avenue. They were a part of my journey that I'm going to share with you today. Back in 2008 through to 2011, they were there to help me through it on both avenues, actually, in terms of the looking for work and also starting a business, which is something I did during that time. So they really do great work.
You've done it all yourself, really, seriously.
Thank you. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is, as Emma said, partly as an HR professional, when I've worked in management consulting, setting up recruitment functions for large organizations. So I understand it from an organizational point of view, how the processes work, what they're looking for, what they're designed to do and what they're not designed to do, what they're designed to help you with and what they're not designed to help you with. I've also been a line manager and a hiring manager, reviewing CVs and conducting interviews. So I know what I'm looking out for from that perspective. And again, what some of the tips that I think would be useful to make my life easier when I'm a hiring manager. And then most importantly, which is I think what most people are signed up for, is my experience as someone on the job market. So this goes back to 2008, and I was very much down on my luck. So I'd been working at an educational charity, which is a really nice job. I was doing events and facilities management, and I thought, probably time I change career, probably time I actually sort out a career. It was just kind of a job I got out of university. And I was thinking about the different careers I could do. And for me personally, I decided I wanted to focus on human resources. So I started doing a master's degree in HR management, which was great. The first year was going fine. But then 2008, the recession hit, the financial crisis hit. And particularly for charities, charities were hit very hard and my job was made redundant. But I thought, actually, this is a blessing. This is a great thing. I've got an opportunity now to try and really focus on getting an HR role, which is what I wanted to do. And I went in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and really enthusiastic, and very quickly found that I was getting absolutely nowhere. And I spent the next 2.5 years out of employment, out of full-time employment, out of any stable, meaningful income. I was applying for hundreds and hundreds of jobs. So from that perspective, I know exactly what worked and what didn't work. During that time, to make it worse, being made redundant there's a big mental strain with that as well. And you shouldn't underestimate if that's the situation you are in. Losing your job is very traumatic. For me, to make matters worse, I just had my second child. I also happened to be living with my in-laws at the time. So if you can imagine living with your in-laws, not supporting their daughter. In particular, my father-in-law, love him to bits. He's both South American and Middle Eastern, so quite a feisty personality. And so there was a lot of pressure. Just apply for any and everything you can do. You've just got to get something. You just got to do something. And it was a really, really tough time. I'm talking about networking in terms of the approach that I took. That will be part of what I talk about. But before I changed my approach, I was still networking. I was going through friends, I was going through family, but it wasn't really clicking, it wasn't really working, and I couldn't work out why. I didn't know why until after 2 years of literally banging my head against a brick wall, where I was, as I say, I was hustling, doing whatever I could, and that included delivering pizza in the evenings, trying to start a business, which I talked about, which thankfully was not successful. And I'll talk about why I say thankfully it wasn't successful a little bit later. But after 2 years of doing anything and everything, I changed my approach. And what I've put together for this afternoon is a summary of what I did and why I think it worked. Your journey will be different. So even if you applied every single step, your story won't be my story. It will be your story. But the fundamental principles will apply, and if you follow them as best you can, then you will be able to make opportunities for yourself. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So before I get into networking, there are a few foundational lessons which you need to have in place, a few foundational principles you need to have in place before you can even start networking and start approaching people and start applying for jobs. The number one most important thing is you need to have a positive attitude and mental resilience. The reason I say that is you will get rejections. You will get lots of rejections, particularly in a market like today where it is applicant heavy. Companies can afford to be very, very picky. So in my situation, I was applying for roles which I knew I could do. Let's say I had 80% of the experience, but because it was such an applicant heavy market, the company could just say, well, you've got 80%, this person's got 95%, I'm going to go with them. So even when I was getting interviews, I was always the number 2 choice. And you will get rejections, and it is hard work, and it is soul destroying. You will make mistakes. Not every interview you have will go brilliantly. Not every CV or application will be perfect, and that's okay as well. The important thing is to stay focused, reflect on anything that time something does go wrong, reflect, take a pause, think about what went wrong, and then move on. I came across quite a nice saying, which I hadn't heard before on LinkedIn the other day, which is you need to stay focused on the windscreen and not the rear view mirror. Think about the mistakes that have happened, reflect on them, but then move on, move forward. For some people, this can be particularly challenging, particularly, so for example, sometimes when people are made redundant or they've lost their job, there's a lot of emotional trauma that goes along with that. And you look for people to blame. I know I did. I was, why am I in this situation? Why, it's just not fair. The company shouldn't have made me redundant. They should have made that other person redundant. That recruiter should have given me the job. They gave it to someone else. And it reminds me of a story I heard many years ago, which is the story of how they first captured monkeys for the zoos. Now, what they used to do, they used to set traps out. And in those traps, it was wide enough for the monkey to get their hand in, and they had nuts in there. And the monkey would stick their hand in, absolutely fine, and grab the nuts. But then when they tried to pull the nuts out, their hand was kind of in this shape, and the hole was only this shape. So if they just let go of the nuts, their hand would have managed to get out. But while holding the nuts, they couldn't let go of the nuts, and so they ended up being trapped and taken into captivity. The lesson that I took from this is, you need to let go. It's not someone else's fault. The company owes you nothing. No one owes you anything. Everything is in your hands, but you just need to let go, and because you're free the whole time. And once you're free, you can then focus on making the right decisions for the next step. So I've spent a bit of time talking about sort of hard work, positive attitude, mental resilience. It's absolutely critical that you focus on this. And the quote I've got on the screen, the harder I work, the luckier I get, that is absolutely true with the approach I'm going to talk you through. The more you apply the lessons, particularly around the networking that I'm going to talk through, the more you do it, the more opportunity you will make for yourself. And I personally found the more messages I sent, the more networking I did, the more opportunities I made for myself that just weren't there or wouldn't have been there otherwise. So the next foundation, again, before I come on to the crux of the matter in terms of what I specifically did, is to get focused. One of the mistakes that I made, and I'm speaking to a lot of people on LinkedIn at the moment, trying to help as many people as I can. One of the mistakes that people make is they're not focused in their job search. I talked earlier about the pressure from living with my in-laws. Just apply to any and every job you can. So, and that kind of it feels like there's a logic to that. The more types of jobs you apply for, the more chance you've got of landing one, because you're applying for more jobs and you're not shutting down any doors. That feels logical, and that's great. But the problem is that's wrong, and that's wrong for any number of reasons, which I'll talk about in a minute. But sometimes different people on this call will be in different life situations. Some of you might be new to your career, and you might be thinking, I don't know what I want to do, or you might have just been made redundant, and you're thinking, you know, I've got experience in this, but actually, do I want to do that? So get focused means think about what it is you want to do as your next move, and that will feed what the next stage of your search is. So I'm not going to dwell too much on all these points, but these are the questions that I asked myself when I was thinking about what it is that I wanted to do. And I said, if I had a magic wand and I could do anything, what would I do? If I had a magic wand and I could do anything, what would I do? And on the screen, you can see some of the questions that prompted coming up with the answer. What am I good at? What am I interested in? What are my values? What skills and capabilities do I need to do that role? Starting to think about what sectors and organizations match up. So that's my ideal on one piece of paper. Then I asked myself, what skills and experience do I have now? That includes technical skills, that includes the transferable skills, that includes things inside the work environment, and that also includes things outside the work environment. I know a lot of people, when they're thinking, and I know certainly I didn't think about any of the volunteering activities that I had done, and some of the skills that I'd gained and experience I'd gained through volunteering until I was sort of speaking with one of the consultants at Work Avenue. And suddenly I realized, there's this whole other heap of information that I can include in helping me understand, in helping me position myself and in terms of what I have. So you've got essentially on one sheet of paper, you've got what do you want to do? And on another sheet of paper, you've got where am I now? And then it's bridging the gap and bringing it to life. As it says there, what organizations, sectors, jobs match up? What can I do to plug any gaps? What are the steps I need to get there? And reaching out to people who've gone through similar experiences and similar journeys and trying to learn from other people. And that last one, what sideways moves do I need to take? That's really important. If I think back to the beginning of my job search in 2009, I think it was, if I think back to the beginning of that experience, if I'd got the job at PwC, if I'd applied for that job at that moment, I would not have got it. I was not ready for that job. I was absolutely not ready. And I had to take sideways moves and do things which I didn't really want to do, but to build up my CV, build up my experience, build up my skills, and build up my competencies. Sometimes that takes patience. But there's a saying, it's easier to get a job once you've got a job. And sometimes taking those sideways moves, which might not be ideal, also leads you in directions that you never would have dreamed of and never would have thought of. And that, for me personally, I can only speak from my own experience, that was certainly the case for me. I remember when I set out in 2008, I had a particular goal in mind that I wanted to do X, whatever that was. And to this day, I have never done that thing. I've never done what I aimed for, but that's okay as well. Having the target drives the action, and the journey takes you where the journey takes you. And I've really enjoyed, I've been lucky enough to enjoy the journey and get some great experiences. And just focusing on the journey has really enabled me to, get experiences that I just otherwise wouldn't have even dreamed of. So this is when I started talking about focus on your job search. So you've spent some time thinking about what it is you want to do. Now you're ready to apply. And there's an approach called spray and pray, or being targeted. And I started talking before about the spray and pray, which is just apply to any job you can do. And the reason that doesn't work is two or three reasons why that doesn't work. Number one, from a very practical perspective, the more jobs you apply for, the more types of jobs you apply for, the more CVs you have to write, because you do have to tailor your CV and your covering letter and your interview prep for every job you apply for. And if you're applying for 10 different roles, you've got to write and manage 10 different CV applications. So by having a very wide net for your job search, you're actually reducing the number of physical applications you can process in any one day. So that's number one. Number two, that also then reflects in interviews. If you're getting an interview, I know when I was doing the spray and pray approach, I'd go into an interview and I just have to think, hey, what's the job I'm applying for? What's my story? What's my answer to that question? And it becomes much, much harder to really impress someone and convince someone in an interview. First of all, there's that moment hesitation where you've just got to think about what you're saying versus if you're focused, where you can really get to grips with your story, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then just again, in terms of the practicalities, having to prepare 10 types of interviews is a lot of hard work, and it just means you can get through less in your job search. And I found by focusing on doing less, I was actually able to get more interviews. Now, once you focused on what those 1 or 2 areas are, I decided if I'm going to focus on the areas that I really want to do. And that's a decision I made, and you'll have to make your own decision about what you focus on. And then there was the master CV or the master cover letter, which I've put down there. So this is a little bit of a hack that I know many others have used, and that I used quite successfully for myself, which is I had one really, really long CV, and I put everything. I mean, everything that I'd ever done or could conceivably be relevant was in that CV. And it was long, and it was far too long for any application. Then what I would do is any individual job I was applying for, I would go through this, read the job description carefully, read the requirements, understand what they're asking for, and delete all the relevant content. And that was an absolute lifesaver. If you're having to write a new CV for every job you apply for, it is a lot of hard work, and it is much easier to delete than it is to write. So I'd get my CV back down to within the 2 pages. For most jobs, it's 2 pages. Sometimes at very senior levels, you need to have a longer CV. But for most jobs, it's 2 pages. So I'd get it down to that. And then the next thing I would do, which is also really, really important, is you look at the words that they are using to describe what they want. And you have to change the words in your CV to use their words. Now, this is where I'm going to speak to you as a hiring manager. I've been a hiring manager reading through lots of CVs. And I'll be honest with you, I find it really tedious and dull. I hate doing it. And especially in today's market where you're going to be in a highly competitive situation, there's going to be a lot of CVs that people are reading. And, you know, it's a fault of mine, but I would start to skim read CVs. And the way I'd skim read is I'd have a list of words from the job description that I know that and things I was looking out for. And those are the words I'd be looking out for. So your job as a job hunter is to make their job, i.e. the HR person or the hiring manager, your job is to make their job as easy as possible. And one of the ways you do that is you take their words and make sure the things that are important to them and the way they're talking about it are very prominent in your CV. If something's also more important, if it seems to be more important, you can move that up to the top, the top of your CV, or move it as high up your CV as possible. So that's lesson number 2. That's get organized. Lesson number 3 is network. And this is where things really took off for me. Before I go into my particular story, I'm going to talk about the general rules of networking so that you know what the etiquette is, what to do, what not to do. These are some general principles. I'm going to leave them on the screen. You can also, Speak to Work Avenue. You can Google these as well. There'll be lots of content on Google about how do you network, what are the rules for maintaining etiquette. But there's one I'm going to talk about in particular, which is the one in the top right. Listen more than you talk. Now, I've got a psychology degree, and one of the huge benefits of having a psychology degree is you can say whatever you want about human nature and just pretend you learnt it in university. So this is actually something I learned in university, which was they did a psychological experiment where they got 2 strangers to sit down and have a conversation for half an hour. And they would time how long each of those participants would spend talking. So let's say person A spent 20 minutes talking and person B spent 10 minutes talking. And then they would ask them afterwards, independently, separately, how much did you like the other person? Now, it seems logical that the person who spoke less would like the other person more. After all, the other person's had more of a chance to talk and explain about them. So as a listener, you've had more chance to get to know the other person. So you'd think the listener liked the talker a lot more. It was actually the other way around. The person who talked more ended up liking the person who was listening more, disproportionately more. And the reason is as follows. When you're talking, you feel like people are listening to you and you feel validated as a person. Oh, this person's listened to me. They like me. I like this person. They're giving me the space to talk. So when you're networking, you will absolutely have your opportunity to talk and to tell people about your experiences. But as much as possible, you need to be quiet and let the other person speak as well and share their knowledge and expertise with you. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Emma, the next part of my session is sort of going into details about what I did specifically, but it's a good time to pause to see if there are any questions at this stage.
Okay, so no one's put a question on the chat just yet, but if anyone would like to ask any questions about anything that Adam has said, do please just put them on the chat, and I'll be able to feed them to Adam. And you know, there's no such thing, we said it at the beginning, but some of you have joined since the beginning. There is really no such thing as a dumb question. If you have a question, the chances are somebody else who's following this session will also be thinking exactly the same thing. So please don't be, you know, shy about that. There has been a couple of questions, which I'm just going to sort of get out there, Adam. Is it better to apply directly to consulting firms, for example, the Big Four, on their website? The person who's asking says, I've observed that they hire external recruiters and candidates going through external recruiters maybe have a better chance of getting hired. So is it worth using external recruiters to do that as almost your agent somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
That's the first question. There are some others, but why don't we deal with that question?
I'll deal with that one. That's a really good question. And for those who aren't interested in going in consulting, I'll talk about recruiters in general. You absolutely have to use recruiters, but they are one part of your job search. So you're there to build relationships with recruiters, make their life as easy as possible, so that they can go off and do the hard work for you in your job search, whilst you then focus on networking and being much more proactive and direct. In terms of the consulting specific question, that will be a part of my story, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But it partly depends on where you are in your career. Do you have experience already? Are you trying to move into consulting for the first time? If you've got experience already, and it's very easy to transfer that. So consultancies tend to like people with industry experience. So they consult into, for me, it was an HR function. So we liked having people in our team who had been in an HR function and understood what that was like. And we also like people who were consultants and just knew the methodology and knew how to approach the projects and programs we worked on. So if you've kind of got the experience already, recruiters will be really good for you, and you can use them a lot more. Going back to the principle of make people's lives as easy as possible. A recruiter's motive is they want to fill a job as quickly as possible, so they can, with as little work as possible, so they can get their commission. Again, whether that's right or wrong, that is the psychology. So if you've got the experience where they can just place you in a position, you know, go for it, focus on that. The flip side of that is you can apply directly. It's always, I find it's always harder, not impossible, but harder to apply for things cold. And again, especially in this environment, people like the reassurance of, you know, either being referred in, again, which I'll talk about in my experience. And if you don't have the experience, then you know, applying cold, you'll tend to get a cold response as well. Again, that's not a 100% blanket rule, but those are some general principles that I would suggest.
Okay, so a couple of people have put on the chat, will the slides be shared afterwards? We mentioned it at the beginning, but I'll mention it again, that yes, they will. The slides, will has been recorded, is being recorded, and it will be shared both on Work Avenue's YouTube channel and also Work Avenue's website as well. It'll be /webinars, so they're there to see. Some other couple of questions that we've had, Matt, if there's time, please. Someone has asked, when networking, do you mean with people you already know or people you have found on LinkedIn? And I think you're probably going to be talking a bit about that moving forward, but if there's a quick answer to that, to answer that specific question now, or let me know whether it's best.
Yeah. So answering that question, I'm going to be talking specifically about building a new network of people you don't know on LinkedIn and making them advocates for you. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, not networking with people you already know. And just going back to the previous comment about will the material be shared, I'm also very active on LinkedIn at the moment, sharing tips and guidance to help job seekers. So look me up on LinkedIn and follow my content, and I will be sharing guidance. I answer questions in there as well. So look out for that content as well.
Okay, there have been other questions also about, someone has asked, should we rely on a person picking out keywords or a system? Is it more likely that our CV will be read by a human person or a system or a computer system?
That's a really good question, and that depends on your approach. If you're doing a generic application, then there'll be a system element to it. And therefore, if you're doing that, you need an applicant tracking system compliant CV. again, what I'm going to be talking about is focusing much more on building those relationships, so that you don't need to rely on being picked up by a machine.
Okay. And there have been some other questions. How do you balance listening stroke talking during an actual interview to make sure the recruiter or the hiring manager gets a good impression? Okay, so we're moving on. That question's asking more about the actual interview. I don't know whether
Yeah.
it's...
So I was talking more about when you're networking and having conversations, but in general that will apply. And specifically in terms of interviews, it's your opportunity to ask questions as well. So as the generic piece, you ask questions, ask really meaningful, challenging, thoughtful questions, and then really listen to the response. And also when they're talking, so sometimes they'll give a bit of a talk at the beginning to tell you about the company, tell you about the role. Make sure that you replay back what they've said to you at later points in the interview. So for example, if I was being an interview and they'd said X at the beginning of the interview, then they asked me a question 10 minutes later and say, oh, similar to X, which you were talking about, which is relevant for you. I can, and that was my springboard to show that I'd been listening and they'd been heard and listened to.
And we've also
Okay.
had more questions. I don't know whether, I hope we're not going to get too sidetracked.
Let's do one more question, then I'll carry, and we'll pick up the rest of the questions at the end.
From one person is, I've taken 3 years off to raise a family. How can I ensure that my CV won't be skim read by a hiring manager?
Yeah. Beautiful question. And there'll be a lot of women who are in that situation. I talked about, and I was debating whether to say this and I decided not to, but I'm actually...
For anyone who's taken a gap, because they've
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. When I was preparing, I was deliberately thinking, should I talk about the example of women who've taken a career break to raise families, but it applies to anyone. But I'll speak specifically to that question, which is when you're raising a family. I talked about, think about what you've done outside of work. Raising a family is hard work. You've got to be organized. You've got to be coordinated. You've got to be a good communicator. There are so many unbelievable skills that go with being a mother and running a household. And you absolutely need to focus on what are those skills that you've developed there. Personally, and this is something that you need to feel comfortable with, I found that one of the challenges I had is, especially in my early applications, is I really wanted people to like me. So I really tried to beef up my CV and talk about all the amazing things I'd done. The problem was I was then snookering myself because I was making myself out to be up here when actually I was down here. And once I started toning down my CV and talked about what am I actually like, what's the experience that I've got, what value can I actually bring, that's why I started being a lot more successful in my approach. And second of all, if you've been off work and the company doesn't appreciate the reasons or doesn't value the reasons for that, it's really hard it's easy for me to say this from my side of the table, but I know it from the other side of the table. Is that a place you really want to work long term if they're not going to value that part of your life? Because that's a really important part of your life.
And someone has just put on the chat as well, it's not just women who are carers.
Absolutely. That's a great add.
That question, As just to be clear to everyone, you were answering that question in response to someone who said that they had, to a woman who'd said she'd taken time out.
Yeah.
But absolutely, these points, the principles of time out apply to anyone in many different scenarios and life circumstances. Exactly the same applies.
Yeah. And in terms of, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but again, reach out to me on LinkedIn because I will be posting content on LinkedIn about this. But there's ways you can manage and present your CV in those circumstances, which are much more effective at really kind of drilling down and highlighting what's the core skills that you've got that they're looking for without drawing too much attention to any gaps, but then without sort of trying to pull the wool over their eyes as well. So again, reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can talk you through those principles as well.
Do you want to move on to the next stage, Andy?
Yes, please. So the next two sections, I'm going to talk about specifically what did I do on LinkedIn. So I'll talk about the very specific actions that I took, and then I'm going to talk about the art and the science of networking in terms of why those approaches work. So first I'll talk about the what did I do, and then the why did it work? So in terms of the what, so this is what I did. I decided, what do I want to do? What is it that I want to do? And for me, it was HR. So I joined lots of relevant groups on LinkedIn, and there's lots of people who say you need to be active on LinkedIn so recruiters can find you and your profile comes up in searches and the algorithm likes you. That's all correct. What I'm talking about, you don't need to be found for it to be effective and for it to work. So you can very much not come up in anyone's LinkedIn searches, and this approach will still work. But you do need to join relevant groups. And the reason you need to join relevant groups is, number one, on the search feature, the algorithm on LinkedIn, you've got first connections, you've got second connections, and you've got third connections. And after that, LinkedIn won't show you anyone else. By joining relevant groups, this is the exception, you're expanding the number of people who will show up in your search. And that's really important for expanding your search. Effectively, what I'm doing is I'm taking the principles of executive search and just applying it to a job hunter. So join relevant groups to broaden your search. Number two, and this is really, really important, think about what is the job title of the hiring manager. And I'm being very specific, not HR. In this, as an HR professional, I can tell you HR is not your friend. Okay, HR is not your friend in this, unless you're going specifically for an HR job. HR is not your friend. So target your search. If you need to do research, find out who's the hiring manager and target them. Then you want to send an invitation. And so you figured out what the job title of the hiring manager is, and then you go into the search feature of LinkedIn. And I did this all on the free version of LinkedIn. I didn't use premium. It might be that you might need to sign up for 1 month's free use of LinkedIn Premium as time progresses. But for me, I did it all on the free version, which is you go into the search feature and say, what's your target organization? For me, I wanted to work, for whatever reason, in one of the big 4 accounting firms: PwC, Deloitte, KPMG, Ernst & Young. So I would write PwC in the company. What's the job title of the person I'm looking for? That's the hiring manager. So for me, it was HR manager. For you, it will be whatever the job title is. And it's very important you aim for the hiring manager, not HR, and not someone really senior. Unless that senior person is going to be the hiring manager, don't aim too high, because they are very busy people, and through no ill will, they'll likely not be able to respond to you. So you think about your location. For me, it was London, and then it's kind of got a radius. And I said, 50 miles of London, because some people travel into London to work, but might live outside. So that comes up with so you put that in the search feature. Then you get about 100 people coming up on the free version of LinkedIn. Then what I would do is I'd systematically, every night, I'd send 20 connection requests on LinkedIn to all the relevant people. Not everyone who came up on the search was relevant, but I'd say I'd be busy doing, working during the day. So focusing on trying to run a business, which was not a successful business, but I spent time trying to do that. I was working in the pizza shop in the evening, and then I'd come back late at night after my delivery shift had finished, and I'd sit down on LinkedIn. I had my search sort of saved. I'd find 20 people and I'd send 20 messages out. Now, it's very, very important that you personalize that message. Because again, as someone who's been on LinkedIn for many years, I get a lot of invitations to connect. And you need to stand out, and you need to know the person if you don't know the person, they need a reason to know. It helps you for them to have a reason. Why is this person approaching me? And the way you position it is you ask for advice. You're not asking for a job. That's very important. Do not ask if they have a job, because if they don't have a job, that's the end of the conversation, and you've lost that relationship. You ask for advice, because people can always give advice no matter what the situation. And the reason that asking for advice it works really, really well is fundamentally you're stroking their ego. What you're doing is you're saying to the person, hello, Mr. Professional, hello, Mrs. Professional. You are the expert in this, and I would like your advice. And they go, oh yes, I am an expert in this. I would love to help. I'd love to, people like being the expert, and they like to be wanted. They like to be needed. And so that increases the numbers of people who respond to you. The other reason it works is people love helping other people. I had a comment on one of the posts I put on LinkedIn the other day, which is, so I posted the story of how I went from pizza delivery driver to PwC, and someone said, oh, very nice story, but you need to be lucky to find someone who gives you a chance. This approach works really well, because the people who come back to you are those people who are going to be willing to help you in your career. They're going to be the people who are happy to help you. I've talked about a couple of stories and a couple of psychological experiments. Here's another psychological experiment, which I learned during university, which is they did an experiment in the 70s where they had participants come in and had them do a very boring, menial activity. It was something like winding a doorknob or whatever it was, for about 20 minutes, half an hour. And at the end of that 20 minutes, half an hour, they then paid the different participants. So this is the 1970s. One group, they paid $20, which was a lot of money, and one group, they paid $1. They then asked the person, how much did you enjoy that task or that activity? Now, it was a really dull, boring, menial activity. So the people who got paid $20 said, I did it for the money. Money was good, so that's why I did it. The people who did it for the $1, who got paid $1, they couldn't say they did it for the money because it was only $1. But the way your brain works, the brain wants to put a reason. There always has to be a reason. There always has to be something in it for you. So your brain will start to make up, why did I do the task? It wasn't for the money. So the only thing I could say is I actually enjoyed the task. So when you're reaching out to people, you're giving them the opportunity to help you in a way that's actually quite small for them, but that builds up their emotional attachment to you. And again, think about it like this as well. When someone gives you advice, if I give you advice, I am now rooting for you to succeed. Why am I rooting for you to succeed? Because my advice is now sitting in you. And if you succeed, that reflects well on me. That reflects well on my advice. So the more people you can you can speak to, who you can ask advice, what you're doing is you're creating a network of people who are actually rooting for you to succeed and who want to help you on the journey. Very important is the second bullet point, is it is a numbers game. So to put it in perspective, I would send out 100 messages over the course of a week, so 20 messages every evening. So that would be about, in 1 week, I'd send out about 100 messages. Of those 100 messages, about 20 would respond in terms of accepting the invitation, but not responding to the message. And then about 10 people would respond to the message, and I'd end up going to meet about 5 of those people. So across all 4 of those organizations, I ended up going to have conversations and going for coffee and getting advice from about 30 to 40 people. And that's 30 or 40 people who are now rooting for me to succeed. And going to that 4th bullet point, one of the reasons this is so impactful is, and I see this a lot, both in terms of CVs and interviews, a mistake that people make is they say, I'm really good at this. And I'll go, okay, how do you know that? That's your opinion. Very nice. You've told me you're good at this. I want you to show me that you're good at this. And part of that's the CVs, which I'm not going to talk about today, about how you talk about how you show your value in your CV. But in terms of this process, you're already showing people who are meeting with you your value, and you're demonstrating some of your skills. You're showing creativity. You're showing relationship building. You're showing communication. You're showing resilience. These are all skills that people value and people like and people respect. And then that point at the bottom is you are queue jumping. So what do I mean by that? So imagine the situation. If I'm just applying for cold jobs, so what's happened is someone has said, I've got a job, and then there's a whole rush of people coming to that queue to apply for that job. And when I join that queue, I'm at the back of that queue. So I try to avoid applying for jobs on the cold. So for example, when I was applying for, I was on job sites like Monster, Indeed.com. They are fantastic for the organization. Imagine you're the company. I need to hire someone. I put a job. Within 10 minutes, I've got 400 applicants who are all qualified for the job. As a hiring manager, I'm not going to, or an HR person, I'm not going to spend time reading 400 CVs and 400 applications. Even if it's 80, I'm not going to spend that. As an HR filtering person, once I've got a short list of 5 people I'm happy to put in front of the hiring manager, I'm not interested in anyone else. And again, whether that's right, whether that's wrong, that is reality. You are not going to get a look in on those job hunting sites. So by taking this approach, you are jumping the queue. You're buying yourself free interviews and a free CV review and a free interview practice with a potential hiring manager. So for example, the first person I met with was a manager at PwC. And the first thing he says to you, so Adam, tell me about yourself. Boom, I can now go through my interview pitch, essentially what it is. And bearing in mind, I need to do the bit which I talked about earlier in terms of, any advice you can give me, but there will be a point in that conversation where he wants to, or she wants to know about you. And that is your opportunity to practice your interview. And again, it's a numbers game. Not every meeting you have will be good, Not every conversation you have will be good. You won't build a relationship with anyone. There were plenty of people who I spoke with and I knew within 3 minutes or 30 seconds, this is going to be a horrible half hour while I sit with that person. But you know what? I never had to speak to that person again. I never had to reach out to them. Forget about them. Focus on where you have the good relationships. So I ended up having this conversation with James. There wasn't a job at that moment, but you know, I followed up with, he gave me really great advice on my CV, and I followed up with him 3 weeks later. And he goes, "Oh, we're applying. Why don't you apply? We've got a vacancy. Why don't you apply?" And this is why I talk about HR not being your friend. And this comes back to the question that someone asked before, if I'd applied with my CV at that time, because I had very little relevant experience, and I mean very little, if I just applied for that job on the website, I would have got filtered out by HR. But because of the way the system works, I put his name down and his email address down as someone who's referring me in. And companies often like people to refer them in. It's because it's cheaper than using recruiters, and it gives them access to talent. But essentially, I bypassed that initial filtering process because I had someone who works in that team saying, "I've met this person. He's got the skills we need. Let's give him an interview." And I was interviewed by it. The way it worked out for me, and again, your story will be different. This might not happen for you, but this is how it happened for me. Is in the interview, I was interviewed by quite a few different people at PwC. One of the people who was interviewing me was James. So I had someone who was advocating for me, who was rooting for me to succeed on the inside, asking me questions and influencing other decision makers to say that I should get the job. So that's how it worked for me. And again, but the more of these meetings you have, the more fluent you become in your interview as well. So honestly, by the time after about a month and a half of doing this, I was so fluent in my CV. I could have been in an interview in a really high profile company and I could have been thinking about the football game at the weekend, and still I would have known that, you know, I've just got my script nailed because I focus my search. I'm only telling one story. You're telling a story of why you're right for this role. I'm only telling one story in my CV, one story in my interview. And I just became so fluent at it that, you know, when it got to the interviews, I bypassed the filter and I've got people on the inside rooting for me. And that's why it worked for me. Like I said, your journey will be different to mine. But for me, that quote on the left explains why this works. When luck shuts the door, you've got to go in through the window. That's, you know, if you're on this call, the chances are you're in a difficult situation. The door has been shut for you. And what most people do in job hunting is they go and knock on another door when they don't realize the back window's open. So if you're applying for a job, that means they put a job out there and there's already hundreds of people or tens of people, whatever the number is, in there before you've even had a look at the job. By taking the approach that I'm taking, you're getting a foot in the door, you're climbing through the window before the jobs arrive. You're starting the queue, you're at the front of the queue. So the approach, it leads to meetings, it leads to opportunities that aren't there at the moment and you won't find if you only apply for existing vacancies. It will lead to interviews and it will lead to job offers. That's what happened for me. And I just want to tell you another little story that I've been talking about. This is what happened to me in 2008, and I want you to know it still works today. So my current situation is I work at Whitbread, who own Premier Inn. Now, hospitality is a horrific sector to be in at the moment. The business is in hibernation, and I'm actually on furlough leave. So I'm not being paid. I'm not working at the moment. Now, my preference is to stay at Whitbread, but I've been on furlough leave since the beginning of April. And I have spent pretty much every day since the 1st of April on LinkedIn messaging people. So that I've built up a network over a number of years, but I've been messaging people who I know already, just checking in, seeing how they're doing. And I'm just warming up my network so that if I need a new job in a few months' time because I'm made redundant, then I've got those opportunities there and I've got people willing to help me. And I haven't even made it halfway through my contacts. I've messaged well over 400 people, and I've already got about between 7 to 10 people saying, "Adam, if the situation comes and you need to find and you need work, come speak to me and we'll see what we can help you." Those aren't jobs that are being advertised. That's me going in through the window without even bothering to knock on the door. So this approach really does work. It worked back then, and it'll work now. I've spent some time giving my story, giving my advice. The truth is, I can't help you. No one else can do this for you, and only you can decide what path you'll take. You can decide to sort of listen to the advice, apply it, as it applies to you, listen to Work Avenue and the guidance they give you. But if you don't take the actions, if you don't have those foundations in place, the positive mindset, taking the right actions, you'll either be on the left of this picture where you can do it, or you'll be on the right and you can't do it when you're already actually really close and halfway there. So before we get to questions, again, just a plug out, keep in touch with Work Avenue. They do some unbelievable work in terms of helping you in your job search. I really, really can't recommend them highly enough. In terms of where the help I can give you, I'm posting free content on LinkedIn. So feel free to go there. And my request is if you found any of this useful, then please sort of like, share, comment, follow, so that other people who are in the same situation as you can find the content and get the help that they need. But at that stage, I will pause, Emma, and open to any questions.
Yeah, thank you. That was so compelling to listen to, Adam. I mean, personally, it was very reassuring to hear that the advice that you are espousing, both from being a job seeker, both from being a hiring manager and being a professional consultant in the field, is absolutely bob on how we advise our clients at Work Avenue. So these methodologies that Adam espouses, he told you they work, he's shown you they work, they really, really do work. We have had quite a few comments on the chat, so if I'm going to take it from where we left off last time. One person has asked, would it be possible to explain, this is actually a very, very good question, how to write your profile for LinkedIn, what to include or exclude?
So that's a really good question. So in terms of the generic advice I've already given is, first of all, decide what you want to focus on, and having a focused LinkedIn profile will help you with your CV. It will help you with your applications, because if your profile says X and you're applying for Y, recruiters and hiring managers will look you up on LinkedIn and they'll say, well, hold on a sec, they're applying for this, but their profile says this. So that's absolutely spot on. You need to have a good LinkedIn profile. My generic advice will apply for your LinkedIn profile. It will apply for your CVs, and it will apply for your interviews. The way I like to describe my experience is using something called the STAR methodology. So that's S/T. That stands for situation or task. In that situation, and this applies for interview answers, CVs, LinkedIn profile. When you're describing your experience, you need to contextualize. You're telling a story. Help people understand what it is you've done. What was the situation or task that you were doing, so that they can really get their hands and they were doing that there. I can see how that applies to my situation. Your job is to make their job as easy as possible. The A stands for action, and this is where you describe what you did. And I mean that very specifically. This is where you describe what you did. What a lot of people go wrong with even if they're using this format, where they go wrong is they'll describe what the team did. So we did this, we did that. As a hiring manager, I want to know what you did. And then the R stands for result. What was the result specifically of your actions? So contextualize, situational task, action, what did you do? Results, what were the results of your actions? And if you've got numeric examples, saved X percentage, or X money, or increased productivity, those are great. They tell their own story. If you don't have those, you can also use qualitative feedback. So great feedback from line manager, from the client, etc., etc. So think about, and by the way, in terms of LinkedIn, they pretty much structure it. They say, here's your about section, here's your profile, here's your job experience. Follow the templates that LinkedIn say, but describe your experience using that STAR format.
Fantastic. One other question, I'm just working through them here very quickly. We don't have that long left, so we do need to be quite focused. But someone has said lots of career coaches at the moment are advising not to personalize connection requests. And the person has commented that this seems counterintuitive, but that's what they're seeing. What are your thoughts on that?
So I can only talk about my experience. I don't understand what the reasoning behind that is. My personal experience is until recently, I was just using LinkedIn as a sort of a regular user, not to post content. And when people sent me an invitation to connect, unless they told me why, if I didn't know them, I would generally ignore the message. So that I can only talk about my experience, and as someone who's people approach to connect, and then also in my experience when I was approaching people to connect, I got a much better response by personalizing the message. I'll be honest, all the advice that I've seen is the opposite of what you said. It's, you have to personalize the message. So you'd probably have to speak to those specific career advisors to understand. And, there might be a logic to what they're saying, but it's not something that I've come across or would do personally.
Okay, and someone else has said, would you say that LinkedIn is more useful than job boards? Is it more important to spend time on LinkedIn or job boards as part of your job search?
That's a good question.
Good question.
My generic advice would be avoid job sites like the plague, for the reasons I said. The only reason this is the only reason I would use a job site. If you need to claim unemployment benefits, you usually you need to submit a certain number of applications. The only reason I used job sites was I had a generic CV which I applied for X number of jobs just so I could claim my unemployment benefit. I wasn't expecting anything of them, and I wasn't expecting to get any interviews, any callback, any feedback. I just did that so I could get my unemployment benefit, and then I focused my entire time on building relationships with recruiters. So this applies for, I do recommend using recruiters, but with the caution I said, in my job search now, recruiters are really helpful for me. At the time when I was changing career and didn't have much experience, they were much less useful for me, simply because I was a round peg trying to get in a square hole, and it's much easier for them to get that square peg in a square hole and get their commission. So avoid job sites other than, for getting a certain volume of applications out for unemployment benefit, and focus on networking.
Adam, one question that I'd like to raise, which I think will be interesting, I hope will be interesting for everyone. LinkedIn Premium, is it worth it? Should people sign up for the extra?
So, as I said, everything I did without LinkedIn Premium. Yeah. I did it without LinkedIn Premium. Now, again, the circumstances now are different. And I would say my advice would be start trying to do it without LinkedIn Premium. I think the limit is there is a certain number of in-mail or invitations or people who come up in your search that you can do in any 1 month on the free version. I personally found that was plenty to get the ball rolling. And then for example, I would spend 1 month messaging one group of people, and then that then kept me busy with meetings and follow up and et cetera, and then by the time that started to tail off, I could then go back the next month when my all the stuff I can do on the free version started again. So my personal advice would start with the free version. If you still need to do more networking, and you still need to reach out to more people because of whatever the circumstances, they have a month free trial. So do the month free trial, but only once you've exhausted everything on the free version.
And because I'm very conscious of time, we're in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to close with one final question. It's quite a generic question, but I think it's a good one to finish on. What were the ways that you found to keep hopeful and keep up your resilience when times got tough?
Superb question. Excellent question. Like I said at the beginning, one of the most difficult things and the most important things is to keep yourself sane. So I talked about some of the practical things about how I made the actual job search more manageable and practical. So that was a big help. The other thing that's really, really important, and again, if I think back to my situation, I was living with my in-laws, not providing for their daughter. I still made sure that when I had those little victories, those little successes, I made sure I rewarded myself with something that I wanted to do, because that keeps you sane and that keeps you focused, and it gives you the energy to go back the next day. And that was really difficult for me under those circumstances. There's that psychological element, which means, I'm in this difficult situation. I shouldn't be rewarding myself with this. I should be, I need to wait till I get that job. The journey is very, very important, and make sure you get all those little wins. It might be, I've written my CV. I'm going to go, for me at the time is, I might go play a game of football. I might go to the cinema. Obviously at the moment, that's not feasible. But think about what's important to you. What do you need to do to keep yourself mentally sane? And give yourself those targets. Sent out X number of invitations to connect. Had your first, when I did it, it was going for coffee. Now it'd be a Zoom meeting. And I've been advising people, and they have been having success in getting meetings on Zoom. So when you have your first Zoom meeting, make sure you go and give yourself a break. Go and do something nice that rewards yourself. And that, for me, that just helped keep you sane. And that's an excellent question. Don't underestimate the value of rewarding yourself for making your job search successful.
Adam, I have to stop there. We are literally at 3 o'clock. I cannot thank you enough. That was so insightful, so informative. And because these are experiences that you have had and proven to be the case, it's so much more powerful than
Mm.
any advisor saying, go and do this. You've lived it. You've that it works, and it makes the world of difference. A few just notices. We have recorded this, as I said. It's going to be available from tomorrow on Work Avenue's YouTube channel. That's Work Avenue. And also on our website, which is workavenue.org.uk/webinars. You will find it there. It will be linked up there. I want to close also by reminding people that we have a webinar most weeks. Next week, however, we have our flagship annual event for SMEs and entrepreneurs, and budding entrepreneurs for that matter, called Startup Central, to help grow their business. It's going to be a fantastic morning from 9:30 until 1:30, a whole series of different events and webinars taking place, breakout sessions, keynote speech by Josh Kettle, who's the entrepreneur behind Shapetastic. So he's on at 1:45 at lunchtime. It's a really fabulous event. Again, go on to Work Avenue's website and you'll be able to book for that. And our next webinar is going to be, our next employment focused webinar is going to be on Tuesday, the 30th of June at 2 o'clock, and it's all about nailing the job interview. So again, look out for details about that. Look forward to seeing you then. Work Avenue are here to advise and guide. Visit our website. Everything and signposting to everything is available on our website, theworkavenue.org.uk. Adam, thank you once more. It has been
Pleasure.
much appreciated, and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. And just to finish off, if you didn't get your question answered, then reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll be there to answer them. Emma, thank you again for hosting.
Thank you all very much. Many thanks and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.